Hey, I'm Brandon, and this is issue 2 of Doomsday Clock on Exploding Earth's Indeps, and let's get right into it. So as the second issue in this series picks up, we immediately get an answer to one of the most nagging questions about issue number 1, which is the importance of Marionette. Book 2 opens up with Mime and Marionette suiting up and painting up in their villain regalia, shall we say, all while Rorschach and Ozymandias are watching on a view screen the recap of an old heist, which is the crime that most likely put Mime and Marionette behind bars in the first place. And what we see unfold over the next handful of pages is that Mime and Marionette are holding up this bank. They have information on a teller's son and are using it to get information on how to get the money out of the vault. The manager of this bank is an absolute jerk, and Marionette takes exception to this, as he's treating this teller extremely poorly during this robbery situation. She ends up actually slicing his finger off in this acrobatic sequence where she flips and chops through his finger with her slicing string. But then, of course, she finds out that he needs that finger to open the vault. But this is all just giving the characters a little bit of room to breathe, and what culminates is, of course, Dr. Manhattan showing up on the scene and actually coming face to face with Mime. Now, Marionette jumps in front of Marcos. She says, "You don't kill him without killing me." Dr. Manhattan looks at her for a moment, and he hears the heartbeat of her unborn child. Now, this is a really interesting factor for me, because as even Rorschach alludes to, Dr. Manhattan has killed people for less, and he even talks about in the original Watchmen series how there's not that much of a difference really between a dead person and a living person to him. And so both from a story standpoint and a character standpoint, finding out who Mime and Marionette's son is almost certainly going to be a huge factor to this series. But in any case, we should move along, because in the Watchmen universe, they are running out of time. There's less than 4 hours before a nuke launches. Oh wait, Rorschach's watch is still broken, and it's already in the air. There's bombs in the air on their way. And what we find out is that Ozymandias has retrofitted Archie, Night Owl's ship, to facilitate their travel from their world to the world that John is currently in. So as we see the nuclear missiles racing through the sky closer and closer to the city of New York in the Watchmen universe, we see Mime, Marionette, and Rorschach join Ozymandias on the Owl ship and take off. Ozymandias has figured out a way to track Dr. Manhattan using the electrons that he is leaking, which also apparently cause his blue coloring. So as those riding in the streets are incinerated, the four aboard the Owl ship shift out of their universe in a beautiful series of panels, which is going to bring us over to Bruce Wayne in the DC universe. What we find out in these panels is that Bruce's role at Wayne Enterprises is predicated upon him passing annual psych evaluations, and that LexCorp is posturing to take over Wayne Enterprises. We also get some insight into the uproar in the DC universe over a growing concern about the Supermen theory. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in this episode, but for now, what I'll say is that the public's opinion has been greatly skewed over that which you normally expect in the DC universe regarding our masked vigilante and other heroes across the world. Now, Bruce writes this off as simple paranoia, but Lucius Fox is concerned that there's more to it. And I guess we'll see who's right as the series goes on. Bruce storms off as the bat signal flies over Gotham, despite protesters in the street proclaiming they do not want the bat vigilante in their city anymore. And it's a beautiful moment as you flip the page and two eyes light up on the bat signal, and Archie, the owl ship, bursts through the clouds the bat signal was shining into. The owl ship crash lands in an abandoned amusement park. Everyone's alright, although Rorschach is not completely of his wits yet and actually lashes out at Veidt, and we get a little more insight on what's going on in their particular relationship. Firstly, we know they've made some sort of agreement and that Rorschach absolutely hates Adrian Veidt. Secondly, we know that this new Rorschach's name is Reggie because Ozymandias calls him by it when he's trying to remind him of where he is and what they're doing. Mime and Marionette are still unconscious in the cockpit of the owl ship. Rorschach and Ozymandias handcuff them to a wall inside the ship as they come to, and they decide to take the kitten Bubastis, who's going to act as a compass for John, and Rorschach and Ozymandias will go off in search of Dr. Manhattan. Now, we're getting close to the end of this second issue, but there's a ton of important things going on here that are going to play huge roles as the series goes on. The first thing I want to note is Veidt alluding to the fact that the DC Universe is ahead of them in many ways, and then behind in others. We also get our first glimpse of a film called The Adjournment playing on a TV at a pawn shop that the two are passing. I think we can unpack some of this leading into the next issue so that we can save some time in issue 3. But in any case, this film plays an important part in this series as well, and Geoff Johns stated that right out of the gate, so we knew it from issue 2 that we were going to be following this storyline going through. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that there's several layers playing at this. It's an award-winning film. It's the last film in the Nathaniel Dusk Private Eye series, and those films all starred a gentleman named Carver Coleman, who's kind of an amalgamation of like maybe Humphrey Bogart and Montgomery Clift or something like that for the DC Universe. And again, we're going to talk about this either at the end of this episode or in the beginning of the next episode. Either way, we're going to get our heads wrapped around this whole concept, but it's very cool. It's a really nice dangling plot thread, and we're going to have a lot of fun with it in the coming episodes. And the last thing that I want to mention about this before we move on is that Carver Coleman, the actor in the film, died mysteriously, or was murdered mysteriously more accurately. So now let's move along. We have Rorschach and Ozymandias looking for Dr. Manhattan. They identify the name of the city, of course, as Gotham, and they decide that the best place to gather intel would be in the public library. They hop on a computer and immediately locate the two smartest men in the world, and Veidt suggests that they split up and explain their situation to each of these men and see if they can get their help. And there's this beautiful shot over his shoulder of a picture of Bruce Wayne and a picture of Lex Luthor. And of course, Ozymandias, being Ozymandias, says he'll take the smarter of the two. And they're to meet back at the Owl ship in 24 hours' time. Veidt also takes a moment to reaffirm that he does not want Rorschach, or Reggie as we now know him, to interact with anybody else during this time, which is interesting. We should keep that in mind. Moments later, we catch up with Rorschach, who's now already infiltrated Wayne Manor, and it looks like he found Bruce's breakfast on the counter, which of course is a plate of pancakes, and we already know that this Rorschach loves his pancakes. As Rorschach is indulging in Bruce's pancakes, the foil that's left over them falls onto the floor. A breeze blows them away. As Reggie finishes the pancakes, he follows this breeze and notices a draft under the bookshelf. He lights a match in front of the grandfather clock. The match goes out. He pries the grandfather clock away from the wall to find the entrance to the Batcave. Now, Batman is out on patrol, but he's alerted of an intruder in the Batcave because Rorschach sets off an alarm as he's walking down the stairs. Rorschach looks over the cases of artifacts, the pinned newspaper articles, the dinosaur, the giant coin, all in the Batcave, and remarks that only a monster would keep trophies like this. So let's cut over to Ozymandias, who is already sitting in Lex Luthor's office as Lex comes in. In typical Lex Luthor fashion, he is not impressed at all with Ozymandias. He allows him to tell him his story as security comes for them, who will then of course be fired once Ozymandias has been kicked off the property for failing Lex. And I love that very much. It just rings so true for the character. It's so simple. It puts you right into the world. If you've never ever read a Superman comic, if you know nothing about Lex Luthor, you will immediately know the kind of man that he is from this handful of panels, and it's brilliant. But as Ozymandias is less than successfully trying to court Luthor, a gunshot rings out over his shoulder, and it has caught Lex. We see a smoking gun, and Ozymandias remarks, "Impossible." because things just got real as the comedian walks into the room back from the dead, as we cut back to the Batcave to see Rorschach staring down Batman, and Batman says, "You ate my breakfast." To which Rorschach replies, "Yeah, I did." And the last panel that we're left with in this book before we go over some notes is the handcuffs laying on the floor of the owl ship. And I didn't really get into it too much, but in this issue, Mime utilizes some of his tools, his invisible tools, to get the two out of the owl ship, and we're going to see more of that in coming issues. So everything is going wrong for our friends from the Watchmen universe. We have, in my opinion, what is the first truly iconic image that this series has produced, with Rorschach and Batman facing each other down, standing right in front of the Batcave's giant penny. And let's, before we call it, get a little bit into the Superman theory that's going on in this book. Okay, so basically what's going on here is that there's this theory that there is a reason why there are so many superheroes from America. That this is a US government initiative to turn people into superhumans, into metahumans. So it's the metahuman theory, or the Superman theory. Nobody can test that Superman is an alien and is not part of this, but since Superman's appearance on Earth, there has been a huge influx, and the majority of them being American, and more specifically even North American, superhumans that kind of stick their nose in situations, at least the theory goes that maybe isn't their place to do so. Those who have already, from the articles that are in this and from the dialogue in this book, Man-Bat, Kurt Langstrom's already kind of implied in this. Metamorpho is already implied in this. Lady Clayface is discussed as well. Sandra Fuller, she is a potential. There's a few others that are going to be coming up in future episodes that you're going to really be surprised by. But this theory is saying that no one is off the table in terms of maybe being a sleeper government agent. This could really affect some lore for characters, either directly or indirectly, in some really interesting ways, as long as it stays in continuity. And it's such an interesting thing to put into this universe, and it creates a whole different kind of arms race, because now you have these other governing bodies in other countries trying to create a superhero, a meta-human program to counteract America's meta-human situation. And so you end up having a literal meta-human arms race going on in the pages of Doomsday Clock, which is an absolutely awesome idea, I think. Now, a little more housekeeping before we move along. I said that I would discuss some of the things that appear in the back pages of the books as they show up, because I did not want to go too far ahead or give you too many spoilers, if you're a really astute reader where this may be going. I want to point out a couple things that show up in the bonus pages of issue 2. So there's a website open to the Bulletin. There's a few articles that you can go through there, the metahuman race article, etc. But if you check under the features section, the third story down, unexplained bizarre green fire destroys all-American steel factory. This is a really, really interesting one, and we're going to see where that goes as the story progresses. But yeah, there's some of the back of the book content is some of the most interesting stuff in terms of getting an idea of what's going on in the larger universe, and that's a really cool thing. Doomsday Clock is written by Geoff Johns, illustrated by Gary Frank, colors are by Brad Anderson, letters by Rob Leigh. Okay, so that's it for this episode. If you haven't already checked out issue number 1, you can find that now. Let us know what you're thinking about Doomsday Clock in the comments below. You can find me online all week at Exploding Earths on Twitter and Instagram. And check out your LCS this week. Tell me what you picked up. And until I see you next time on this show or another one of our shows on the Exploding Earths Comics channel, thanks for hanging out with me.
Something must be wrong at headquarters. Nobody answered my signal.
Bruce Wayne, otherwise known as the Batman.
Thank you, Robin.